We are not examining these children. We are trying to see their abilities, how their abilities are going to help us to move with them the next time. So if you ask, for example, a child to read, and he reads very well without any correction with regards to pronunciation, and you are very happy, that exceeds your expectation, because you expect a child at this stage to sleep once or twice. Do you get the point? But if the child reads and he has perhaps ameteleza kidogo, he doesn't read exactly what you want, maybe he pronounces wrongly at the assessment time, you would say this child meets expectations because of that. But a child who is struggling, you can also assess them. The child who is struggling, the game here is to empower the child to be skilled. Get your mind out of the examination mode, because I think that is what is causing the problem.
It is not really an exam. So a test assessment of the success of first year of implementation of the new competency-based curriculum in grade 3 has begun in schools. The Kenya National Examination Council last month announced plans to review the success and problems of the new curriculum in grade 3. The Kenya Early Years Assessment will be administered to all learners in this grade and will test English, mathematics and integrated learning. Education Cabinet Secretary Professor George Magoha says the assessment is only meant to establish whether the learners have exceeded, met or failed to meet expectations, to enable teachers identify areas to focus on for the benefit of the children. However, there are some parents who have several questions on the assessment, and education experts are questioning the content and indeed the timing of that assessment. And that is a conversation we're having this evening on The Big Story. I'm Linda Ogutu. Thank you for joining us. We will be speaking to Dr. Pamela Odhiambo. She's the Migori Woman Representative. And apart from being the Migori Woman Representative, she's a teacher by profession. So I want to pick her mind on what she thinks about this grade 3 assessment. We'll also be speaking to Jonathan Messiah, who's an education expert on phone. But for now, let's bring in our lead reporter, Sophia Wanuna, who's in the city center. Sophia, good evening.
Good evening, Linda. So this assessment of the grade 3 pupils is one that has created quite some debate. Some continue to ask questions as to what exactly does this mean, what does it portend going forward. They're hearing of examinations that are still being sat by these young children, asking questions as to what extent is it different from the dispensation under KCSE and K844, I beg your pardon, 844, where you saw those final year examinations to the extent of after primary school, after secondary school, so that after grade 3, where are they being assessed? I have with me Amos Kaburu, who is an education analyst, to help us just go through some of those questions that have emerged around this. Thank you for making time for us. So many are saying that this has begun now, this assessment of grade 3 pupils. But in your view, that's not the case. It has been ongoing. So what happened today?
Thank you, Sophia, and good evening to our viewers. The fact of the matter is that there are components which had started earlier on, and Kenyans have been treated to what some people have called circus, some of us have called it drama, and some of us have called the fun of children walking in markets in sacks and all that, trying to clean the market. These were part of the components of the grade 3 assessment that had actually been conceptualized, what is called the Kenya Early Years Assessment. And so what we are having today are components which are specifically done in the school and which have got 3 areas. It is basically collapsing all the 6 or close to 7 learning areas that children undertake in early years. And so you have an assessment in the area of literacy, you have an assessment in the area of numeracy, and what you call integrated learning. That's bringing together these other learning areas, be it environmental activities, be it what we call nutrition and hygiene. Do you have what you have movement, craft, all those kind of activities that involve psychomotor activities. That means the use of the hand. Yeah. This curriculum is about what we call the triple H. Education for the head, which is about what you know as the knowledge, education for the heart, which what you call values, and then you have what we call education for the hand, that is the skill. So that's all that is all about. So this assessment didn't start today, and there's nothing too big about. I'm really surprised that Kenyans are really treated well out of this.
Let's talk about the not too big about this, the whole hullabaloo we may be getting. The head, I suppose, part of the assessment and to the extent of a written exam is what some have questioned what's going on. We had those national exams that we thought we were doing away with for one to be found to be fit to go to the next level. So why is this happening? And if one is then found not to be fit in this assessment, are they then deemed to remain where they are? Do they advance? So if they are advancing, the question becomes, what's the point anyway?
Exactly. Now, it's important to tell Kenyans that what is happening is to provide feedback to the system as far as implementation of CBC is concerned. The question of assessing grade 3 is not a new phenomenon. Government has always conducted what is called the National Assessment System for Monitoring Learner Achievement. NASIMLA is always an assessment that has been done on grade 3. Some of us have also been involved in the space of assessing young children and working in households. And in my work in Twaweza, what we have done in East Africa, Kenyans will tell you, we visited many households for the last 10 years. We've assessed more than 1.5 million children across East Africa, and there's no hula baloo about everything. The point is that it is foolhardy to really compare care with what we see in KCSE and what we see in KCPE, because KCPE and KCSE, the reason why they are called examinations, but in this part of the world they are called high stake, it's because of the individual implication it has on a child. That is, the results that you get in KCPE and the results that you get in KCSE, they are used for what you call selection and certification. It is what gets you a space to another level. So what happens in this part of the world, because we do not have assessments that are highly developed, but when you go to countries such as the US, you do not have a national examination. In fact, assessments such as Scholastic Aptitude Test, SAT, and Test of English as a Foreign Language, TOEIC Bridge, which is done in Japan, you have GMAT, you have GRE, actually done by private organizations such as the Education Testing Services. So it is not a big deal. The point is that it's important for government to get an answer. The resources that we are investing in early years of education, which is just supposed to serve 3 functions. 1, develop children to be able to have reading skills, children to have some basic numeracy skills, and children to be stimulated to understand what the environment is all about. Government wants to get the question, are we investing these resources in the right place or not? Number 2, the question of assessment is neither here nor there. When a child is born, the first thing that we do, we first of all measure their weight. So assessment is part of life. You cannot run away from it and begin lying to people that assessments are not going to be there. It is for a fact, this is not an examination. Because when you talk of an examination, even in the medical field, it is very detailed because it's looking at many components. But this one is very, very specific. You only want to know whether what you have invested all these resources can lead to children reading or not reading. Children have some basic skills in mathematics or not. Now, I know that the tension that is around there, it has got everything to do with the preparation that have followed this process. But I think I must really commend NEC for being bold enough to pull off this process, because if it hadn't pulled it off, I think it would be a big disaster for this country, because it is not NEC which is designed to have an assessment in grade 3. CBC as designed requires at the end of the early years, which is PP1, PP2, grade 1, 2, and 3, we need to have a systemic feedback to the system and test the system. Are you functioning or are you not functioning? It's more or less supposed to serve as an audit. So the questions that government was to understand, are learning outcomes equally distributed among whether they are the different genders, boys and girls, among areas that are highly marginalized and areas that are not marginalized, so that government can plan for resources accordingly. So there's not going to be an individual feedback to a child. These resources, when they are put together, it is to serve a national purpose of telling how do you distribute resources in education. So I think that much as some of us, we have problems with the CBC, we have problems even with the way this assessment has been designed. But I think just for us to lie to the public that everything about it is wrong, I think it will be very, very wrong. Maybe let me go back to what I said, that why I commend NEC. You see, the implementation of CBC started this year, and we've had a lot of challenges, which I don't think that I'm the right person to talk about the challenges that have faced implementation of CBC. But for the short time that NEC took the bullet to say that, wait, CBC requires that we have an assessment at the end of grade 3 and taken a very short time to design something for us. I think it's quite commendable, and we must therefore applaud our institutions when they make an attempt to respond to what they are expected to do.
Let me jump into that commendation. You're saying NEC have done a good job, but you have conducted and have been involved in the exercise of assessing children.
Yes.
So one of the biggest concerns was preparation, whether the teachers are able to have the capacity, the know-how to do this assessment. So is it enough to have an exercise, or is it talking about something that is efficient, that has the results desired in as far as it's actually serving the purpose it was intended, as opposed to it's happening, but it's a whole murky confusion world to the extent of what are we really doing? That a person who's been riding a bicycle all of a sudden has been given a kaingia hapo utajua tukiendelea mbele.
I think one of the things that, Sophia, we also have to understand is that government plans for scale. Government is not dealing with the 20 schools. Government is not dealing with the 200 schools. Government is dealing with the 28,000 public primary schools and a myriad of close to another 15,000 private schools. So when government plans, it is basically planning for scale. That's one of the things that you need to know. Number two, there are so many questions around teacher preparation, not just in the issue of assessment. It is therefore important to get feedback even on these aspects, because wait for a minute. Children have been going to school from January up to right now. What were they assessed in first term? What were they assessed in second term? Definitely something was happening. So there is nothing wrong for government to collect information and ask what capacities do our teachers have? How many years should we have waited? Because the question of readiness is a very, very positivist question. It is neither here nor there. You do not have a readometer which you can use to say that now this is the level of readiness and all that. And I know some people say that I'm being trivial, but this is not being trivial. This is the reality of the matter. We must call it as it is. There's no time when we can say that readiness in whose perspective, because all these are things that can actually basically be put on the table. This is what government has done. It has said that moving forward, what you need, because research has shown that our teacher capacities in terms of assessment are weak. Both our internal studies and even studies by World Bank and the rest have shown that our teacher capacities in terms of assessments are extremely weak. So we have to build capacities. And what are these capacities? Capacities number one, to set. Capacities number two, in terms of processing and reporting those scores. When it comes to marking, it is not a problem. But what you set, how many questions should you have in, for instance, in an assessment for you to say that this child is ready or this child has this skill or they don't have that skill? It's a big question that many people don't know. How do you use these results? How do you report to a parent? What do you mean when you say that a child has an A and a child has a B+? These are questions that cannot be answered as an instant coffee. And I think that what we need to understand as Kenyans is that this is a change process. It is not going to be instant coffee where you wake up and expect that everything will be working as you expect. There's heavy reliance on ICT. What implication does it have?
And I want to jump into the ICT factor because, again, an indictment on the government. On one hand, 2013 President Uhuru Kenyatta coming into power talked about a laptop for all the kids. We all know how that really did not happen. They then morphed into the digital literacy program. And a report recently indicting that right on one hand, we have all of these laptops and gadgets, and as far as the digital literacy program is concerned around the country, the capacity is not there, so that some are locked up in lockers. You don't have the chiefs with some of those laptops or tablets. So how does the government then pull back and reconcile that this is a program that needs to then work for this program and CBC to be operationalized the way it should be?
I agree with you, Sophia, and I don't think that we need to belabor how the Minister of Education bungled the digital learning program. So I don't think that is already in the public domain. We know it. However, there's one fact that we can't run away from. Whether you like it or not, whether you implement CBC, you implement 844, you call it outcome-based, you call it whatever you want to call it, moving forward, education will be heavily reliant on ICT. What does this therefore mean? We have problems with how we implemented DLP, and these are questions to do with the design. Of course, there were many interests from like where I stand. I strongly believe that there were many interests, which perhaps account for why we have got all these challenges. And my challenge has only been one: to the people who have the responsibility to design such large scale. Borrow a leaf from companies like Safaricom, When Safaricom was designing M-Pesa, you don't need a smartphone for you to operate M-Pesa. It is as simple that any kind of mobile phone, as soon as you put in your SIM card, you're able to operate it. Why don't you invest in technologies that make it easier for us to adapt? Maybe that's the reason why certain things are easily scalable and others are not scalable. Otherwise, we cannot run away and tell ourselves that ICT is not going to be there. It is going to be there. Lastly, it's important to recognize that who are you designing this curriculum for? You are not designing this curriculum for my mother in Chakalin, who is 80-year-old. You are designing this curriculum for the children of the digital natives. These social media guys who have the Kenyans or KOT and KOT loyals, they are the owners of CBC. They are heavy on ICT, so you cannot run away from it. In fact, what worries young people right now, these digital natives, are only two things. Your battery is at 2%, and your MBs are below, you have below 2 MBs. That is the only thing that worries them. Why does it worry them? Because that is their world. So it's important that even when we discuss issues around curriculum implementation and all these assessment, we don't lose that focus. We are talking about a curriculum that will serve us in 2050. So you cannot be telling us right now that we design that curriculum again that is heavily reliant on paper. It is not going to work. So there are problems with how DLP was conceptualized. There are problems with how DLP was implemented, and even where it is right now. But that does not take away the reality that moving forward, education must be heavily reliant on ICT. So it is just important that government goes back to the drawing board, picks up sufficient lessons, and be able to design a model that works. Even in these issues of assessment, you don't need to have NEC doing everything. You can borrow a leaf from the US, where assessments are highly liberalized. I look forward to a time in this country where children will just walk into an assessment center anywhere, just the way you walk into a cyber cafe and say that today I want to undertake an assessment on how to play a musical instrument. You do not need to wait for the end of the year for you to sit for something called an assessment or an examination. That's what liberalization means, and that is what the 21st century requires. That is what CBC is all about. It's not about boxing all children together. We must be able to creatively and carefully interrogate the inputs that deliver to us what I've called the triple H education: education for the head, education for the heart, and education for the hand. And lastly, where you seek for what you call help, the 4H approach: head, heart, hand, and where you seek for help.
Good way to wind up this evening. Amos Kaburu with us here, an education analyst. Linda, back to you for the rest of the conversation.
He says it's about the head, the hand, the heart, and the help. And he says this is not essentially an exam. It's just an assessment of how well you're doing with CBC, so that the government can figure out what is the way forward. Sophia, thank you. So let's bring in Dr. Pamela Odhiambo, Migori woman representative. She's joining us from our City Center studio. Ma'am, good evening. Thank you for joining us on The Big Story this evening. I'm just listening to Kaburu and his explanation on why this is essentially necessary. He says it's not an exam, and this is the only way that you can be able to figure out the strides that the students are making, how well, what are the successes and failures of CBC. As a teacher, because I know your background is in the teaching profession, what are your thoughts about subjecting grade 3 students to quote-unquote an exam, a national one at that, even though the Cabinet Secretary and, of course, the education official says this is not an exam?
Thank you very much, Linda, and good evening, viewers. I think what we are going through as a country is very interesting, and all of us are concerned. Personally, as a teacher from my educational background, I think CBC is a good idea. The idea of making our children get some knowledge into their heads, be able to kind of master them and keep them in their heart, and of course, use the same knowledge to manipulate their environment using their hands, and seeking help, as the Cabinet Secretary has just said, Mr. Mbugu has just said, sorry. But I think what is really itching every one of us is the way this thing is being implemented and the way it has been carried out. It looks more of an experiment with all these millions of children in Kenya. And I think as a parent, a teacher and educationist, this is what is worrying. I would have wished that even this assessment, what they are calling not an exam, should have been done at the piloting stage. But as it were now, we are actually implementing this thing nationwide. And so it would have been fair that before the children were subjected to this kind of exercise, the teachers themselves should have been able to expose them at least to an equivalent of what is expected as a way of preparing them, as a way of making them familiarized with what they are supposed to do. But here we are being told that even the teachers do not really know what it is all about and how it is going to be done. And you know, that kind of thing makes the learners anxious. So even us as grown-ups, if we take courage and say, yes, it is okay, as we are being encouraged to do, but the little children are very anxious about it, and that anxiety alone may actually hinder some of them from doing the right thing that they are supposed to do. So one, the whole thing should be relooked at. You know, much as we know the government is planning for posterity and not just now or a few individuals, it is also important that when we design this curriculum, we should also consider, before rolling it out, what does it really take to do what we are setting out to do. I think personally, I'm on record, many times I've commented and said that what the implementers of this curriculum forgot was that it was very much resource intensive. You needed more than one teacher in a class of 50 or 100 pupils like we have in some of our public schools in the Republic to be able to instruct these children and take them through the psychomotor skills that they are supposed to learn.
Okay.
Number two, the materials themselves and the space that they need. I think some of our schools are lacking very much in what I've just said. So I think we appreciate the exercise, and as it is put, it may not directly add any value to the learner, but it will be a kind of an assessment where the government or the implementers of the curriculum want to know whether it is working or not.
Yeah, and you see,
the question here that I think many parents and teachers are asking,
yeah,
how will the results help the learners themselves? Because if it is found not to be working, are we saying that we will stop the experiment or we will continue with it?
Mheshimiwa, that is the question. That is where people are asking a lot of questions. Okay, fine.
Yes.
So you have 1.3 million children who are going through this assessment, and the objective is to just go through CBC, make sure a year down the line, is it working, is it not working? So what happens if it's not working? Do we go back to square one? Do we start afresh? What happens to these students?
That is what is not clear. That is what is not clear to us, even as representatives of the people, or even the teachers, or even the learners themselves. Because whenever we are doing any project, of course, that evaluation is important, but it is not clear what are the corrective measures that the government would want to take, especially with this lot of kids that have gone through it up to the grade 3. I think this is the anxiety that maybe the Ministry of Education may need to spell out and dispel from the parents, from the children, from the teachers, and all of us.
Yeah, just so that people can know, okay, fine, if it's not working, so what next? Mheshimiwa, I know that Kaburu said, I mean, this will have zero implication on the future of these children. It's just an assessment. But in the same breath, Education Cabinet Secretary Professor George Magoha says it will have no implication on whether or not these children move to the next class. But then there's a contradiction there, because and someone has even asked on Twitter, will my child be able to move to the next grade if they don't sit for this exam? Yes or no? So then essentially it is an exam. I wish the Ministry of Education would just tell parents it is an exam that determines whether or not, or how well your child is doing. Then we deal with it.
Yes, those are the many questions that even personally teachers and even parents have asked me. And that's why I'm urging the ministry to be clear. is this exam going to be a determinant whether the child is continuing? Of course, we know the backdrop is saying that we have 100% continuity. You know, we are not going to stop any child. But the question is, this child who is not yet able to master what is at this level, what do we do with this child? Does she or he go back to grade 1 and start all over again? Does he repeat the grade 3? What really happens to this child? Because pushing a child who is not able to manipulate and perform whatever they are expected to perform, pushing them ahead, again, by the end of the day, we are rolling out somebody who has no idea what they have been learning all this time in school. So this needs to be really clear, because I think much as we are calling it an assessment and not an exam, it should be able to help us to take some corrective measures. As a strategic manager, you don't just carry out an evaluation exercise for the sake of it. You need to set a target, and when that target is not achieved, you need to take a corrective measure. Okay. And if that target maybe is overachieved, still you need to take some corrective measure. And therefore, just telling us that it will not affect the learner in any way, I think from an educationist point of view, that is a statement which is wanting. Okay. All right, so I need to take a break, but when we come back, I also want to talk about what this psychologically does to children. I mean, these are what, 9-year-olds, 10-year-olds. At the back of their mind, they wake up knowing I'm going to do an exam, that even though I'm going to go through an assessment, that even though the ministry says it's not an exam per se, it will have some implication on how I perform, whether or not I meet expectation, above meeting expectation, below expectation, whichever way it will affect their lives. So psychologically, what are we doing to children, and are we doing this the right way? I was speaking to someone earlier in the morning, they're saying, I mean, these are, what, 9-year-olds, the best they want to do is know their family around. You can't start telling them to go to the market and clean. At that age, their mind is not as mature enough to just understand the environment and what is happening. And we'll be speaking to him in a couple of minutes. That is Jonathan Messiah. So let me take our first break here on The Big Story.